He reflected on the importance of codified law, centralized governance, educational reform, and merit-based institutions as mechanisms for societal stability, economic development, and civic loyalty. Napoleon's writings emphasized that leadership requires foresight, discipline, and the ability to harmonize diverse elements of society, from military forces to civil administrators and cultural institutions. These contemplations also reveal his awareness of historical judgment. While military failure could erase political dominance, institutional and legal achievements could endure, influencing future generations and shaping the trajectory of nations. In this sense, St. Helena became both a place of exile and a space for intellectual legacy building, allowing Napoleon to define and interpret the significance of his reforms. His reflections demonstrate that the Napoleonic vision extended beyond conquest and power. It sought to create durable structures of law, governance, and civic order, securing a legacy that continues to resonate in modern legal, administrative, and social systems. Napoleon Bonaparte passed away on May 5, 1821, on the island of St. Helena, ending the life of one of history's most consequential leaders. His death was the culmination of years of exile, reflection, and deteriorating health, compounded by the harsh environment and limited medical resources available on the remote island. Napoleon's final days were marked by continued intellectual engagement, dictating memoirs, and reflecting on his career, governance, military campaigns, and reforms. Despite being removed from power and isolated from Europe, he remained keenly aware of the enduring significance of his contributions to law, administration, education, and social cohesion. News of his death reverberated across Europe, eliciting a mixture of grief, admiration, and relief, depending on the perspective of observers. Monarchies and former adversaries regarded his passing as the end of a turbulent era, while many in France and other regions where his reforms had lasting impact recognized the passing of a visionary leader who had transformed societies through both conquest and institutional innovation. Napoleon's death prompted immediate consideration of his legacy. Historians, political thinkers, and statesmen began to assess not only his military prowess, but also the enduring influence of the legal codes, administrative systems, and social reforms he had implemented. The reaction to his death illustrates how historical figures are remembered not merely for their conquests, but for the structures, principles, and institutions they leave behind, highlighting the multidimensional impact of Napoleon's life on European and global history. One of Napoleon's most enduring legacies is the Napoleonic Code, which continued to shape legal systems long after his death. Across Europe and in various parts of the world, civil law systems drew upon its principles of equality before the law, codified rights and obligations, and standardized legal procedures. Countries in Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and parts of Germany retained or adapted the code, reflecting its practical and philosophical appeal. Beyond Europe, the code influenced legal frameworks in Latin America, the Middle East, and even the United States, particularly in Louisiana. Napoleon's centralized administrative systems also endured. The meritocratic bureaucracy, prefect system, and professionalized civil service became models for governance, demonstrating the practical advantages of rational, centralized, and accountable state institutions. His reforms in education, such as the lycées and technical schools, created a professional and educated elite that persisted beyond his lifetime, influencing national governance, industry, and military organization. The continued relevance of these structures highlights how effective institutional design can outlast political defeat and military loss. Napoleon's posthumous influence underscores a critical lesson. While power may be fleeting, carefully designed systems of law, administration, and education can establish long-term stability and guide the development of societies for generations. His enduring impact demonstrates that visionary governance, rooted in clarity, meritocracy, and rationality, can transcend the lifespan of any single ruler. Napoleon's life and reforms have been remembered, interpreted, and mythologized in multiple ways across history. In France, he became a symbol of national pride, military genius, and institutional modernization, despite the controversies and human costs associated with his campaigns. Historians, political theorists, and legal scholars have debated the balance between his authoritarian tendencies and his contributions to rational governance, law, and education. Across Europe, his reforms were often admired and emulated even by those who opposed his military conquests, demonstrating the enduring appeal of efficient administration, codified law, and meritocratic systems. Cultural memory, literature, and art contributed to the myth of Napoleon as a larger-than-life figure whose influence extended beyond the battlefield to the very structures of modern society. Monuments, museums, and historical narratives preserved his achievements and failures, creating a complex legacy that continues to be studied and debated. Napoleon's posthumous memory serves as a case study in how transformative leadership can leave a lasting imprint. Military genius, legal codification, administrative reform, and educational innovation together create a multifaceted legacy that shapes societies long after the individual has passed. His life illustrates the enduring tension between personal ambition and systemic impact, and the ways in which historical memory preserves, interprets, and amplifies the significance of reform, law, and governance across generations. One of Napoleon Bonaparte's most enduring contributions to modern Europe is the Napoleonic Code, which profoundly influenced the development of legal systems across the continent. By codifying civil law in a clear, rational, and systematic manner, Napoleon created a legal framework that replaced fragmented, inconsistent, and regionally varied laws. The code emphasized equality before the law for men, property rights, contractual clarity, and clearly defined family obligations, introducing predictability and fairness into civil life. Its adoption in regions beyond France, including Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and parts of Germany, illustrates its adaptability and enduring appeal. Even in countries that were never part of the Napoleonic Empire, legal reformers studied the code as a model for rational governance, demonstrating that its influence extended far beyond immediate political control. The Napoleonic Code also laid the foundation for the civil law tradition in countries as distant as Louisiana in the United States, Latin America, and parts of the Middle East. By codifying principles of justice, responsibility, and civic equality, the Code not only shaped legal practice, but also influenced the philosophical and institutional understanding of law in modern states. Its legacy highlights how well-structured legal frameworks can endure long after the ruler who implemented them, demonstrating the power of codified law as a tool for social order, governance, and modernization. Napoleon's influence on modern governance is equally significant in the realm of administrative reform. By centralizing authority, introducing a merit-based bureaucracy, and organizing France into departments overseen by prefects, Napoleon created a system that balanced efficiency, accountability, and national cohesion. These reforms provided a template for modern state administration, demonstrating the advantages of standardized procedures, professional civil service, and centralized oversight. European nations, particularly those influenced by or allied with Napoleon, adopted similar administrative models, recognizing that effective governance required a balance between local autonomy and central control. Beyond Europe, the principles underpinning Napoleon's administrative reforms influenced public administration practices in emerging nations, guiding the development of bureaucratic structures capable of managing complex societies. By integrating legal uniformity with administrative efficiency, Napoleon created a durable system in which governance could be rational, consistent, and resilient to social and political disruptions. His reforms illustrated that centralized administration, when combined with meritocracy and standardized procedures, can enhance state capacity, support institutional longevity, and facilitate the implementation of broader societal reforms. These contributions remain a cornerstone of modern statecraft, demonstrating that effective governance is both a product of institutional design and a reflection of visionary leadership. Education was another domain in which Napoleon's reforms exerted a lasting influence on Europe and beyond. By establishing the lycées, specialized schools, and professional institutions, Napoleon created a meritocratic educational system designed to produce skilled administrators, military officers, and professionals capable of serving the state. This system emphasized discipline, civic responsibility, technical expertise, and intellectual development, integrating education into the machinery of governance. Welcome to the channel, where we dive deep into the stories that shaped our world. Today, we embark on an epic journey through the life and legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's most fascinating figures. From his humble beginnings on the island of Corsica, to his meteoric rise as a military genius, to his transformative reforms in law, education, and governance, Napoleon's story is a masterclass in ambition, strategy, and vision. In the next 2 hours, we'll explore how Napoleon not only conquered armies, but also reshaped nations. We'll follow his brilliant military campaigns, his creation of the Napoleonic Code, the establishment of meritocratic schools, the centralization of French administration, and his efforts to reconcile religion, culture, and society under a unified vision. We'll see his triumphs and challenges across Europe, his exile, daring return during the 100 Days, and ultimate defeat at Waterloo. Finally, we'll reflect on his enduring legacy, how his reforms influenced modern legal systems, bureaucracies, and educational institutions, and why Napoleon remains a figure whose story continues to inspire, warn, and captivate us. So sit back, immerse yourself in this epic tale, and join us as we unravel the extraordinary life and lasting impact of Napoleon Bonaparte, only here on this channel. Napoleon Bonaparte, born on August 15th, 1769, on the island of Corsica, emerged into a world marked by turmoil and upheaval. Corsica had recently been annexed by France, and the Bonaparte family was of modest nobility. From a young age, Napoleon displayed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics, history, and strategy, qualities that would shape his approach to leadership and governance. His education in French mainland schools exposed him to Enlightenment ideas, which emphasized rationality, equality before the law, and secular governance. France, meanwhile, was convulsed by revolutionary change. The French Revolution of 1789 dismantled centuries of monarchical rule, upended the aristocracy, and introduced the concepts of liberty, fraternity, and equality. Yet, despite these ideals, the revolutionary government struggled to maintain order, as factions fought for power and the economy and legal systems remained unstable. Napoleon, recognizing both the chaos and the opportunity, positioned himself as a figure capable of bringing order and stability. His early military success during the Italian campaigns showcased his ability to combine strategy with political insight, building his reputation as both a general and a visionary. The need for reform in France was undeniable. Centuries of inconsistent laws, fragmented governance structures, and uneven access to education and opportunity had left the country vulnerable to internal strife and external threats. In this context, Napoleon's rise was not merely a personal achievement. It was a response to the urgent need for systemic reform. He understood that consolidating power was inseparable from transforming institutions, law, and education, setting the stage for his enduring impact on French society and beyond. By 1799, France was teetering under political instability, economic uncertainty, and military pressures. The revolutionary government, the Directory, was increasingly seen as corrupt and ineffective. In November of that year, Napoleon executed a coup d'etat, known as the Coup of 18 Brumaire, which effectively ended the Directory and established the consulate, with Napoleon as first consul. This marked the beginning of a period of concentrated authority, enabling him to pursue widespread reforms. Napoleon was acutely aware that consolidating power required legitimacy, both in the eyes of the French public and the international community. He skillfully used propaganda, military success, and political maneuvering to present himself as a stabilizing force who could restore order without betraying revolutionary principles. Central to this strategy was the need to codify laws and create institutions that would survive beyond his personal rule. He understood that a nation could not thrive on ad hoc decrees and inconsistent legal traditions. France had inherited a patchwork of feudal customs, royal edicts, and revolutionary decrees, resulting in legal confusion and disputes. By establishing clear, rational, and uniform legal codes, Napoleon aimed to replace arbitrariness with predictability, strengthen the authority of the state, and secure the rights and duties of citizens. This approach reflected both Enlightenment rationalism and a pragmatic vision for governance. Law and education would serve as tools to consolidate power while promoting societal stability. Once in power, Napoleon immediately embarked on a systematic program to modernize French institutions. He recognized three key areas for reform: the legal system, education, and administrative governance. Each domain was critical not only for improving efficiency and justice, but also for shaping citizens' loyalty to the state. Legal reform would culminate in the Napoleonic Code, a unified civil code that would replace the inconsistent and fragmented legal landscape of pre-revolutionary France. Education reform aimed to create a meritocratic system that would produce competent administrators and loyal citizens, countering the social inequalities that had destabilized the nation. Administrative reforms, including the centralization of authority and the establishment of prefects to oversee local governance, ensured that the state's policies could be implemented uniformly across France. These reforms were not solely intended to serve Napoleon personally. They were designed to strengthen France's institutions and provide a model for rational, modern governance. By addressing structural weaknesses in law, education, and administration, Napoleon laid the foundation for a France capable of enduring political, social, and military challenges. The early years of his rule thus reflected both ambition and vision. He sought to create a legacy that extended beyond military conquests, one rooted in the transformation of society itself. One of Napoleon Bonaparte's most enduring achievements was the creation of the Napoleonic Code, or the Civil Code of 1804. This legal framework did not emerge overnight. It was the culmination of years of study, consultation, and philosophical reflection on the nature of law, governance, and society. Before the Revolution, France was burdened with an inconsistent and fragmented legal system. Local customs, royal edicts, and feudal rules varied widely between regions, creating confusion and injustice. The Revolution had attempted to impose equality under the law, but had done so in a piecemeal and often contradictory manner. Napoleon recognized that a coherent and unified legal code was essential not only for justice, but also for consolidating state authority. He drew upon Enlightenment ideas, particularly those emphasizing reason, rationality, and individual rights. The focus on merit over birth or privilege provided social mobility, fostering loyalty to the state while producing competent leaders. Napoleon's educational reforms also contributed to the formation of a shared national identity, as students were imbued with civic values, historical knowledge, and an understanding of their roles as citizens within a rational, centralized state. The principles underlying these reforms, meritocracy, professional training, and civic education, have influenced modern educational systems worldwide, inspiring institutions that integrate technical skills, leadership training, and civic engagement. By linking education with governance, Napoleon demonstrated that the cultivation of human capital is essential to sustaining legal, administrative, and social reforms. The enduring impact of his educational policies highlights the interconnectedness of law, administration, and education in shaping modern societies capable of resilience, cohesion, and progress, reflecting the comprehensive vision that defined Napoleon's approach to state building. Napoleon Bonaparte's life and reign represent one of history's most remarkable examples of a leader who combined military genius, political acumen, and institutional reform. His achievements were multidimensional, spanning law, governance, education, administration, culture, and military organization. Among his most significant accomplishments was the creation of the Napoleonic Code, which codified civil law into a clear, consistent, and rational framework that has endured in various forms across Europe, the Americas, and beyond. This legal system exemplified his capacity to integrate Enlightenment principles, such as equality before the law, property rights, and merit-based regulation, into practical governance. Philosophers like Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire had long criticized arbitrary law, advocating instead for clear, systematic, and equitable rules applicable to all citizens. Napoleon sought to create a legal framework that reflected these principles while addressing the practical needs of governance and social stability. The code would establish property rights, family law, civil liberties, and contractual obligations in a manner that was systematic, predictable, and enforceable. Its design reflected a careful balance. It reinforced state authority while granting individuals clear rights and responsibilities. The philosophical foundation of the Napoleonic Code thus combined the ideals of equality, rational governance, and civic duty, providing a legal template that would influence not only France, but nations across Europe and the world. The Napoleonic Code was remarkable for its clarity, organization, and focus on principles of civil law. It was divided into distinct sections covering persons, property, and the acquisition of property, reflecting a logical structure intended to simplify legal understanding and application. One of the most significant innovations was the codification of civil rights in a manner accessible to ordinary citizens. The code enshrined equality before the law for man, abolished feudal privileges, and established rules for inheritance, contracts, and property ownership, while it reinforced the patriarchal structure of family life, granting fathers and husbands significant authority. The code also clarified legal rights and duties, reducing arbitrary interpretation and legal uncertainty. Furthermore, it standardized commercial law, providing a stable framework for trade and economic development. By unifying regional variations, the code eliminated legal fragmentation that had hindered commerce, governance, and social cohesion. Its implementation required an extensive bureaucratic effort, as judges, lawyers, and administrators had to be retrained and local customs harmonized with the national standard. Napoleon personally oversaw many aspects of the drafting process, ensuring that the code was not only theoretically sound, but also practically enforceable. The result was a legal instrument that combined Enlightenment principles with pragmatic governance, serving both as a tool of social order and a model of rational codification. The Napoleonic Code's impact extended far beyond the borders of France. Domestically, it provided a stable and predictable legal framework that supported governance, economic growth, and social cohesion. Citizens could rely on clear rules regarding property, contracts, and family obligations, reducing disputes and increasing confidence in the state. Its influence on education, administration, and governance was profound, as legal clarity allowed other reforms to take root more effectively. Internationally, the code became a model for many European countries, particularly those conquered or influenced by Napoleon. Nations such as Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and parts of Germany adopted aspects of the code, demonstrating its adaptability and enduring appeal. Even after Napoleon's fall, the principles embedded in the code influenced legal systems across Europe, Latin America, and parts of the Middle East. Its legacy persists in modern civil law traditions, underpinning the legal frameworks of countries as diverse as Italy, Spain, Egypt, and Louisiana in the United States. The Napoleonic Code exemplified how law could serve as both a tool of governance and a lasting cultural legacy, embodying rationality, equality, and order. By codifying the ideals of the Revolution within a durable legal structure, Napoleon not only stabilized France, but also left a template for modern legal systems that continues to resonate centuries later. Prior to Napoleon's rule, education in France was inconsistent, fragmented, and largely inaccessible to the general population. Under the Ancien regime, education was primarily reserved for the aristocracy and the clergy, with most schools run by religious institutions. The curriculum emphasized classical subjects like Latin, Greek, and theology, while practical knowledge relevant to administration, commerce, or military service was largely neglected. The French Revolution had attempted to address these disparities by introducing public education and promoting the ideals of reason and citizenship. However, the revolutionary government was politically unstable, and its education reforms were often poorly funded, short-lived, or unevenly implemented. As a result, literacy rates remained low, and many talented individuals lacked the opportunity to advance based on ability rather than birth or wealth. Napoleon recognized that a strong, centralized state required competent administrators, skilled professionals, and loyal citizens. Education was not simply a moral or intellectual pursuit. It was a strategic tool to consolidate state power. By reforming the education system, Napoleon aimed to create a structured, merit-based framework capable of producing individuals capable of serving the state efficiently, maintaining social order, and promoting loyalty to a unified France. This vision required the establishment of institutions that could train students systematically, reward talent over privilege, and instill civic values aligned with the goals of the state. In 1802, Napoleon established the lycées, a network of state-run secondary schools designed to educate the nation's future leaders. These schools were funded and regulated by the state, emphasizing subjects relevant to administration, science, mathematics, and military service. Admission was based on merit, creating opportunities for talented students from non-aristocratic backgrounds to rise through the social ranks. This meritocratic system was revolutionary in a society long dominated by privilege, offering a path to social mobility based on ability rather than lineage. The curriculum at the lycées combined rigorous academic instruction with moral education and civic training, reflecting Napoleon's belief that education should prepare individuals not only intellectually, but also morally and socially. Teachers were carefully selected, trained, and supervised by the state to ensure consistency and adherence to national objectives. In addition to lycées, Napoleon established specialized institutions for higher education and professional training, such as the École Polytechnique for engineers and the École Normale for teacher training. These institutions fostered expertise in fields critical for military, economic, and administrative success. By centralizing and standardizing education, Napoleon created a coherent system capable of producing competent, loyal, and disciplined citizens prepared to serve both the state and society. The focus on merit, discipline, and civic values marked a profound departure from the fragmented, privilege-based education of pre-revolutionary France. Napoleon's educational reforms had far-reaching consequences, both for France and for global models of public education. By institutionalizing meritocracy and central oversight, he created a system in which talent and ability could shape one's social and professional trajectory, reducing the influence of inherited privilege. The lycées and specialized schools produced a generation of administrators, engineers, military officers, and professionals who were well-trained, competent, and loyal to the state. The emphasis on civic education, discipline, and moral development fostered a sense of national identity and shared purpose, helping to stabilize France socially and politically. Beyond France, Napoleon's educational model influenced European nations and later inspired modern public education systems worldwide. Countries recognized the value of standardized curricula, merit-based admission, and state oversight in cultivating capable citizens and leaders. Even today, institutions modeled after the Napoleonic educational system exist, demonstrating the lasting influence of his reforms. By integrating education into the machinery of the state, Napoleon not only strengthened governance and administration, but also reshaped the relationship between citizens and the state. Education became a vehicle for both social mobility and political stability, cementing Napoleon's vision of a rational, merit-based, and cohesive society. In this sense, his reforms extended far beyond his reign, leaving an enduring legacy that continues to shape modern educational philosophy and practice. Before Napoleon's rise to power, France's administrative system was fragmented and inefficient. The Ancien regime had relied on a combination of feudal structures, royal appointees, and local privileges to manage governance, resulting in widespread inconsistency, corruption, and confusion. Laws, tax collection, and judicial authority varied widely from province to province, often leading to disputes, delays, and dissatisfaction among citizens. The French Revolution attempted to address some of these inconsistencies by abolishing feudal privileges and establishing local municipal governments. But the revolutionary state was politically unstable, and reforms were frequently inconsistent, poorly implemented, or overturned as factions gained and lost power. Napoleon recognized that effective governance required not only uniform laws and competent officials, but also a clear, hierarchical system capable of implementing policy efficiently across the nation. Without strong administration, legal reform and education reform would have limited impact, as the execution of policies would remain inconsistent and vulnerable to local resistance. To achieve his vision of a rational, merit-based, and cohesive state, Napoleon needed to establish a centralized administrative framework that could unify France under clear lines of authority while maintaining flexibility to respond to local needs. This required reorganizing the state's bureaucracy, appointing competent officials, and creating mechanisms to ensure accountability and loyalty at every level of government. Napoleon's solution to France's administrative challenges was both pragmatic and systematic. He reorganized the country into departments, each governed by a prefect appointed directly by the central government. Prefects acted as the eyes, ears, and hands of the state, overseeing local administration, tax collection, law enforcement, and the implementation of national policies. By appointing individuals based on merit and loyalty rather than birth or local connections, Napoleon ensured that authority flowed from the center, while local administration remained efficient and consistent. Prefects were given substantial power, but were held accountable through a hierarchical system of oversight, reporting directly to the central ministries in Paris. This system allowed the state to maintain control over distant regions, reduce corruption, and enforce legal and educational reforms uniformly across the nation. In addition, Napoleon strengthened the judicial and bureaucratic branches by standardizing procedures, training officials, and creating specialized ministries for finance, education, and public works. These reforms ensured that decisions were guided by rational principles and consistent policies, rather than arbitrary or locally influenced practices. The centralization of authority under Napoleon did not simply consolidate power for its own sake. It created a framework in which the ideals of rational governance, legal uniformity, and merit-based advancement could be applied effectively. By transforming the structure of administration, Napoleon built a system capable of sustaining reform, implementing law, and maintaining stability across a diverse and previously fragmented nation. The administrative reforms Napoleon implemented had profound and lasting effects on France and beyond. Domestically, the prefect system and centralized bureaucracy facilitated uniform enforcement of laws, consistent taxation, and effective management of public resources. This administrative stability strengthened the state, reduced local resistance, and allowed reforms in law, education, and infrastructure to take root more effectively. Beyond France, the Napoleonic model inspired administrative restructuring in other European nations. Countries under Napoleon's control, including Italy, the Netherlands, and parts of Germany, adopted similar centralized systems, recognizing the efficiency and effectiveness of his methods. Even after Napoleon's fall, the principles of his administrative reforms continued to influence French governance. The prefect system, standardized bureaucratic procedures, and emphasis on merit-based appointments remained central to French administration well into the 19th and 20th centuries. Furthermore, Napoleon's vision of a professional, centralized state bureaucracy set a precedent for modern governance worldwide, demonstrating that effective administration could serve as the backbone of legal, educational, and social reforms. By reorganizing France's administration, Napoleon not only strengthened his own rule, but also created a model of governance that combined efficiency, accountability, and rationality, one that continues to inform modern statecraft and bureaucratic systems around the world. Napoleon Bonaparte's military career was not only the foundation of his rise to power, but also a critical instrument for consolidating his reforms and securing his legacy. From his early years as a young artillery officer, Napoleon displayed remarkable strategic insight, rapid decision-making, and an ability to inspire loyalty among his troops. His campaigns in Italy between 1796 and 1797 showcased his ability to combine tactical brilliance with psychological acumen. Facing numerically superior forces, Napoleon employed innovative maneuvers, such as dividing enemy forces and concentrating his own strength at decisive points, enabling him to secure stunning victories. Beyond battlefield tactics, Napoleon understood the importance of logistics, discipline, and organization, ensuring that his armies were well supplied, coordinated, and capable of sustained campaigns. These early successes not only enhanced his reputation, but also demonstrated the strategic link between military and political power. Victory on the battlefield enhanced his legitimacy, allowed him to project authority domestically, and created the conditions for implementing his sweeping legal, administrative, and educational reforms. In this sense, Napoleon's military genius was inseparable from his broader vision of state building. The army was both a tool of conquest and a mechanism for stabilizing and modernizing France. His campaigns in Italy, Egypt, and later across Europe exemplified a blend of tactical ingenuity, strategic foresight, and the ability to leverage military success to bolster political authority, illustrating how mastery in warfare could drive enduring institutional reform. Napoleon's military campaigns across Europe allowed him to extend his influence far beyond France's borders, not merely as a conqueror, but as a reformer exporting the principles of governance, law, and administration. Conquests in Italy, the Netherlands, the Rhineland, and parts of Spain and Germany presented opportunities to implement the Napoleonic Code, centralized administration, and standardized educational systems in newly acquired territories. By installing loyal administrators and adopting uniform legal frameworks, Napoleon created conditions for political stability, economic modernization, and social reform in regions previously governed by fragmented feudal or arbitrary systems. The introduction of uniform taxation, efficient bureaucracies, and merit-based institutions strengthened both local governance and the cohesion of the Napoleonic Empire. These campaigns also reinforced the concept that military success and state building were interconnected. By conquering territory, Napoleon could institutionalize the principles he had applied in France, demonstrating the exportable nature of his reforms. While the campaigns often met resistance, particularly from entrenched elites or populations loyal to traditional monarchies, Napoleon's approach combined military might with administrative and legal rationality, leaving a lasting imprint on European governance. Regions subjected to his reforms frequently retained elements of the Napoleonic Code, centralized administration, and meritocratic educational practices long after his defeat, illustrating the enduring influence of his military-driven reform strategy. Napoleon understood that military success was not only a tool for external expansion, but also a key factor in consolidating domestic legitimacy. Victories such as the Battle of Marengo in 1800 and the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805 captivated the French public and reinforced his image as a leader capable of securing France's position on the European stage. By positioning himself as both a military hero and a reforming statesman, Napoleon created a narrative in which personal glory and national progress were intertwined. This narrative helped stabilize the French state internally, as citizens viewed him not only as a conqueror, but also as a protector of revolutionary gains and a modernizer of institutions. Moreover, military triumphs provided the resources and political leverage necessary to implement reforms across law, education, and administration. Conscription systems, reorganization of military academies, and the training of officers created a professional military capable of sustaining both external campaigns and domestic security. Napoleon's strategic insight extended beyond battlefield tactics to the broader understanding that military, legal, educational, and administrative systems were mutually reinforcing. The military was both a symbol and a mechanism of state power, legitimizing reforms while ensuring their enforcement. Through these campaigns, Napoleon demonstrated that military genius could serve not only personal ambition, but also systemic transformation, cementing a legacy that combined strategic brilliance with institutional modernization, creating a model for integrating power, governance, and societal reform. When Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power, France's economy was in a state of considerable disarray. Years of revolutionary upheaval had disrupted trade, caused inflation, and left the national treasury depleted. Agricultural production had been destabilized by the chaos of war and social unrest, while industries struggled with inconsistent regulations and shortages of raw materials. The fiscal system of the Ancien regime had already been inefficient and inequitable, relying heavily on feudal dues, indirect taxes, and inconsistent levies that varied from region to region. Simultaneously, Napoleon centralized the French administrative system, introducing meritocratic appointments, standardized procedures, and a network of prefects capable of implementing policy uniformly across the nation. In education, he established the lycées and specialized institutions that promoted technical expertise, civic responsibility, and social mobility, creating a professional elite aligned with state priorities. Napoleon also understood the symbolic power of culture, architecture, and religion in shaping public loyalty, national identity, and social cohesion. His military innovations, including the core system, tactical flexibility, and rigorous logistical planning, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how organization and strategy can reinforce governance and legitimacy. Taken together, these achievements illustrate a leader who sought not only personal glory, but also the rational transformation of society, leaving enduring structures that continue to influence modern states. Napoleon's approach to governance offers enduring lessons from modern political and administrative systems. Central to his philosophy was the integration of law, administration, education, and culture into a coherent framework that reinforced stability, efficiency, and societal cohesion. His reforms demonstrate the value of meritocracy, where competence and performance are rewarded over privilege, producing effective leaders and administrators capable of implementing complex policies. The centralization of authority, combined with mechanisms for accountability, illustrates the importance of coherent institutional design in achieving consistency across diverse territories. Napoleon's attention to logistics, resource management, and coordination further underscores the necessity of practical, evidence-based decision-making in governance. During the Revolution, attempts to stabilize the economy through price controls, nationalization of church lands, and currency reforms had achieved mixed results. Political instability and the constant threat of foreign invasion further strained the state's resources, making it difficult to maintain consistent public services, pay the army, or fund infrastructure projects. Napoleon recognized that without a stable economy, his ambitious reforms in law, administration, and education would be undermined. A well-ordered economy was not just a matter of wealth. It was essential for sustaining political stability, military strength, and public confidence in the state. He approached the problem with a pragmatic and centralized vision, emphasizing fiscal responsibility, institutional oversight, and strategic investments in infrastructure and commerce. By addressing these economic challenges, Napoleon sought to create a system capable of sustaining both domestic prosperity and the costs of an expansive military campaign, ensuring that France could endure both internal and external pressures while consolidating his reforms. Napoleon's approach to economic reform combined centralization, fiscal prudence, and strategic investment. One of his most important initiatives was the creation of the Bank of France in 1800. This institution provided stability to the national currency, regulated credit, and ensured that public funds could be managed effectively. By centralizing financial control, Napoleon curtailed the chaos caused by competing local banks and unregulated currency issuance, laying the foundation for long-term economic stability. Tax collection was also reformed. A professional, merit-based bureaucracy was established to ensure that taxes were levied fairly and efficiently, reducing corruption and improving public confidence in state institutions. These measures increased government revenue without imposing excessive burdens on citizens, demonstrating a balance between fiscal responsibility and social stability. Napoleon also invested in infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and canals, to facilitate trade, enhance mobility, and strengthen economic integration across France. These projects not only boosted commerce, but also reinforced the legitimacy of the state by demonstrating its capacity to deliver tangible improvements in citizens' daily lives. Additionally, Napoleon encouraged industrial and commercial development through regulations that promoted standardization, quality control, and innovation. By combining financial institutions, taxation reforms, infrastructure development, and economic regulation, Napoleon created a coherent system capable of sustaining both government operations and the broader economy, illustrating how economic management was integral to his broader program of modernization and reform. Napoleon's economic policies had profound and lasting effects on France and, indirectly, on Europe. The establishment of the Bank of France created a foundation for stable monetary policy that endured long after his reign, contributing to financial security and confidence in state institutions. Standardized taxation and professional administration allowed France to sustain both domestic initiatives and military campaigns, demonstrating the link between fiscal organization and state power. Infrastructure projects not only improved trade and mobility, but also became enduring elements of France's economic landscape, supporting industrialization and urbanization in the decades that followed. Beyond France, Napoleon's emphasis on centralized economic management, professional bureaucracy, and state-supported infrastructure influenced other European nations, particularly those under French control or influence during the Napoleonic Wars. Countries adopted similar approaches to taxation, banking, and public investment, recognizing the effectiveness of centralized oversight combined with strategic economic planning. Economically, Napoleon demonstrated that state authority and fiscal organization could serve as tools for modernization, stability, and societal development. By addressing systemic weaknesses, creating institutions for stability, and investing in the nation's productive capacity, he ensured that France could endure politically, militarily, and socially, leaving a legacy of economic rationality and institutional foresight that continued to shape governance and financial policy across Europe for generations. When Napoleon assumed power, France was not only politically fragmented, but also socially unsettled. The French Revolution had dramatically transformed society, abolishing feudal privileges, redistributing property, and promoting egalitarian principles. However, these revolutionary changes also created tension and uncertainty. Aristocrats and clergy had lost influence and wealth. The urban poor often remained impoverished, and rural peasants, while legally free, faced economic hardship and local instability. Revolutionary reforms, while ambitious, were inconsistently applied, leaving many citizens unsure of their rights and obligations. Furthermore, social unrest persisted, fueled by ongoing military campaigns, economic fluctuations, and resistance from groups nostalgic for traditional hierarchy. Napoleon recognized that stabilizing French society was crucial for maintaining political authority and ensuring that his reforms in law, administration, education, and the economy could be effectively implemented. His approach was pragmatic. Rather than seeking to overturn the revolutionary gains, he aimed to consolidate them while establishing structures that balanced order, hierarchy, and opportunity. By addressing social divisions, codifying rights, and creating mechanisms for mobility and inclusion, Napoleon sought to foster loyalty, social cohesion, and a sense of national identity. This social stabilization was essential not merely for governance, but for sustaining the broader vision of a rational, modernized France capable of enduring both internal and external challenges. Napoleon implemented several targeted social policies to stabilize French society while reinforcing his authority. One of the most important measures was the Concordat of 1801, an agreement with the Catholic Church that restored religious peace while maintaining state control over clerical appointments and funding. By reconciling the Church with the state, Napoleon mitigated a significant source of social tension without undermining revolutionary secular principles. The Civil Code, beyond its legal implications, also reinforced social order by clearly defining family structures, inheritance rules, and property rights, providing a framework that balanced individual freedom with societal stability. Additionally, Napoleon promoted social mobility through merit-based institutions such as the lycées and specialized professional schools, enabling individuals from non-aristocratic backgrounds to rise through talent and achievement rather than birthright. This approach helped integrate citizens into a system that rewarded loyalty, competence, and civic responsibility. Napoleon also emphasized symbolic and practical initiatives to cultivate national pride and a shared identity. Public ceremonies, honors like the Legion of Honor, and the promotion of civic virtues were designed to unite citizens around the state and reinforce the notion that individual success and societal stability were mutually dependent. These policies demonstrated Napoleon's nuanced understanding of society. He combined pragmatic reconciliation, institutional incentives, and cultural messaging to create a cohesive, functional, and politically loyal citizenry capable of sustaining his broader reforms. Napoleon's social policies had lasting effects on France and, indirectly, on Europe. By balancing revolutionary gains with pragmatic governance, he stabilized a society still recovering from years of upheaval, creating conditions conducive to economic growth, administrative efficiency, and educational advancement. The Concordat established a model for the relationship between church and state that influenced later governments seeking social harmony without sacrificing secular authority. The Civil Code's regulation of family, property, and inheritance created a predictable social framework that reduced conflict, promoted fairness, and reinforced societal norms. Merit-based educational and professional systems enabled individuals to advance through talent rather than lineage, fostering social mobility while strengthening loyalty to the state. Beyond France, the social models Napoleon implemented, reconciliation with religion, legal standardization, and meritocratic institutions, were emulated in territories under his control and in nations observing French reforms. These measures demonstrated that social cohesion, when paired with rational law, centralized administration, and economic stability, was a key ingredient for state resilience and modernization. Napoleon's approach revealed a sophisticated understanding of society. Social policy was not merely a moral imperative, but a strategic instrument to maintain stability, legitimize authority, and integrate citizens into the functioning of the state. The enduring legacy of these reforms is evident in modern governance, civil society, and education systems across France and beyond, underscoring Napoleon's profound influence on social organization and statecraft. When Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power, Europe was a continent in turmoil. The French Revolution had destabilized traditional monarchies, undermined old alliances, and inspired both fear and admiration among neighboring states. Countries such as Austria, Prussia, Russia, and Britain faced not only the military threat of revolutionary France, but also the ideological challenge posed by the spread of revolutionary ideals like equality, citizenship, and secular governance. These nations formed successive coalitions against France, leading to a series of conflicts known as the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon's approach to foreign policy was deeply intertwined with both military strategy and domestic governance. He recognized that France's survival and the success of his reforms depended on securing its borders, projecting power abroad, and preventing hostile coalitions from destabilizing the state. Unlike previous rulers who often relied solely on diplomacy or brute force, Napoleon integrated both elements into a comprehensive strategy. He combined military campaigns, strategic alliances, and political restructuring to reshape Europe according to French influence. His foreign policy objectives were not limited to conquest. They included exporting French legal, administrative, and educational reforms to create satellite states aligned with his vision. By situating his domestic reforms within a broader geopolitical strategy, Napoleon demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of power, legitimacy, and the interdependence between internal stability and external influence, laying the groundwork for a transformed Europe that would bear his imprint for decades. Napoleon's foreign policy was characterized by a combination of military conquest, strategic alliances, and institutional reform. Through victories in Italy, the Rhineland, and Central Europe, he not only expanded French territory, but also implemented the Napoleonic Code, centralized administration, and merit-based institutions in conquered regions. These reforms replaced fragmented, feudal, or inefficient systems with rational, standardized structures that mirrored those in France. Strategic alliances, whether through marriage, diplomacy, or the creation of client states, such as the Kingdom of Italy and the Confederation of the Rhine, allowed Napoleon to extend influence without the constant expenditure of military resources. The installation of loyal rulers and administrators in these territories ensured that French legal, educational, and administrative models could be implemented effectively. Napoleon's approach exemplified the interconnection between foreign policy and governance. Military victories facilitated reform, and institutional reform, in turn, stabilized and legitimized French influence. However, his policies also generated resistance and resentment, particularly among populations accustomed to traditional monarchy or local autonomy. Guerrilla warfare in Spain, nationalist uprisings in Italy, and opposition from Prussia and Russia highlighted the challenges of imposing reforms on diverse societies. Despite these difficulties, Napoleon's foreign policy fundamentally reshaped Europe, extending the principles of centralized administration, codified law, and meritocracy far beyond France, leaving a lasting imprint on the political, legal, and social structures of the continent. The legacy of Napoleon's foreign policy extends well beyond the borders of early 19th century Europe. By combining military strategy with institutional reform, he demonstrated that conquest could serve as a vehicle for modernizing governance, legal systems, and education. The Napoleonic Code and centralized administration, introduced in conquered territories, often persisted long after his defeat, influencing legal and bureaucratic frameworks across Europe. Moreover, his reshaping of political boundaries, creation of satellite states, and reorganization of European alliances contributed to a reconfiguration of the continent that influenced international relations for decades. Napoleon's approach also underscored the importance of legitimacy in foreign policy. Conquest alone was insufficient. Success required the establishment of governance structures that could maintain order, win loyalty, and integrate local populations into a broader political system. While his military campaigns provoked resistance and eventually led to his downfall, the principles embedded in his foreign policy, strategic integration of reform, centralized administration, and rational governance, provided a model for subsequent European leaders seeking to stabilize and modernize their nations. In this sense, Napoleon's diplomatic and military strategies were inseparable from his vision of reform, illustrating how power, law, and governance could be harmonized to reshape not only a single nation, but an entire continent, leaving a legacy that resonates in modern political and legal structures. Napoleon Bonaparte's legal reforms were among his most enduring contributions, and the Napoleonic Code became a model far beyond the borders of France. As Napoleon expanded his influence through military conquest and strategic alliances, he systematically introduced the code into newly acquired territories. Countries such as Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, and parts of Germany saw the replacement of fragmented, feudal, and inconsistent laws with a unified civil code. This was not merely a transplantation of French law. It represented a fundamental restructuring of societal and legal norms. By codifying rights, duties, and procedures in a clear and accessible format, the Napoleonic Code created predictability, equality before the law, and centralized authority in regions that had previously experienced local legal autonomy. Administrators in these territories were trained in the principles of the code, judges and lawyers were educated in its applications, and local populations were gradually socialized into new legal practices. The introduction of the code often accompanied other Napoleonic reforms, such as merit-based bureaucracies and standardized education, creating a comprehensive system of governance designed to stabilize conquered territories. Napoleon's legal exportation demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of law as both a tool of administration and a means of social transformation. Beyond enforcement, the code's clarity and universality fostered trust in governance and reduced disputes arising from arbitrary or local laws, illustrating how legal standardization could underpin broader societal cohesion across Europe. The impact of the Napoleonic Code was not confined to Europe. Its principles traveled across the Atlantic, particularly influencing Latin American nations and regions with European colonial ties. In countries such as Haiti, Louisiana in the United States, and several Latin American republics, elements of the Napoleonic Code shaped civil law traditions. In Louisiana, for example, the code influenced property law, contracts, and family law, contributing to a legal framework distinct from the English common law prevalent in other American states. In Latin America, emerging republics drew on Napoleonic principles to codify civil rights, property ownership, and legal procedures during the early 19th century as they transitioned from colonial rule to independent governance. This transnational influence demonstrated the adaptability and universality of Napoleon's legal vision. By emphasizing equality before the law, clarity in legal proceedings, and standardized rights and duties, the Napoleonic Code offered a template for rational governance applicable across diverse cultural and social contexts. It also underscored the idea that legal reform could be a mechanism for both modernization and national identity, providing newly independent or restructured states with a coherent system capable of promoting social stability, economic growth, and the rule of law. The enduring legacy of the Napoleonic Code is evident in the legal frameworks of many modern nations. Its principles, legal equality for men, property rights, contractual clarity, and codified civil obligations, formed the foundation of civil law systems throughout Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa and the Middle East. Even where not directly implemented, the code influenced legal thinking and reform, serving as a benchmark for rational, codified law. Its influence persisted through periods of political upheaval, colonial transition, and modernization, illustrating the durability of a well-structured legal system. Furthermore, the code demonstrated how law could function as a centralizing force, reinforcing state authority while providing citizens with predictable rights and obligations. By integrating revolutionary ideals with practical governance, Napoleon created a legal instrument that balanced reformist ambition with administrative functionality. The Napoleonic Code continues to be studied and referenced in modern legal scholarship, underscoring its status as one of the most significant achievements of his reign. Its transnational adoption reflects both its adaptability and its philosophical grounding in rationality, equality, and systematic governance, cementing Napoleon's reputation not only as a military strategist and political leader, but also as a legal innovator whose influence continues to shape modern societies. At the same time, his career highlights the limits of overextension, military conquest, excessive centralization, or unsustainable ambition can undermine even the most rational systems. By balancing reform, governance, and strategic foresight, modern leaders can draw insight from Napoleon's successes and failures. Understanding how law, education, administration, and culture interact to create resilient, adaptable, and effective states capable of sustaining long-term social and political stability. Napoleon Bonaparte occupies a singular position in world history, as both a conqueror and a reformer whose influence transcended his lifetime. While his military campaigns reshaped Europe and redrew political boundaries, his administrative, legal, and educational reforms established structures that outlasted his empire and continued to inform modern governance. The Napoleonic Code, meritocratic administration, and rationalized education serve as lasting contributions to law, bureaucratic efficiency, and civic development. Beyond tangible reforms, Napoleon's life illustrates the dynamic interplay between individual leadership, institutional innovation, and societal transformation. He demonstrated that visionary leaders can leverage military, political, and administrative power to create lasting societal structures, while also showing the risks inherent in overambition and external conflict. Historians, legal scholars, and political theorists continue to study his methods, decisions, and reforms, recognizing both the brilliance and limitations of his approach. Ultimately, Napoleon's legacy lies in his ability to transform ideas into practical institutions, combining military genius with legal, educational, and administrative innovation. He remains an enduring example of how leadership, vision, and systematic reform can leave a profound and lasting impact on nations, governance, and global history. Napoleon Bonaparte understood that governance, law, and military might alone could not sustain a cohesive and loyal society. Culture played an essential role in shaping national identity, public perception, and loyalty to the state. Unlike rulers who saw art, architecture, and literature merely as luxuries, Napoleon viewed culture as a strategic instrument to consolidate power, reinforce legitimacy, and promote civic values. He actively sponsored artists, architects, and scholars, ensuring that their works reflected the grandeur, discipline, and rationality of the state. Public monuments, paintings, and sculptures celebrated French military victories, civic achievement, and national heroes, cultivating pride and shared identity among citizens. Napoleon's cultural policies were closely intertwined with his broader vision of modern France. They emphasized order, merit, and rationality, mirroring the principles underpinning his legal, educational, and administrative reforms. By controlling patronage, exhibitions, and commissions, Napoleon ensured that cultural production aligned with state objectives, creating an environment in which the arts became both a reflection of power and a tool for shaping public sentiment. This approach also helped legitimize his authority domestically and project an image of France as a modern, enlightened nation to the rest of Europe. Napoleon's cultural strategy demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between governance, public perception, and identity formation, illustrating how art and culture could reinforce the structural reforms underpinning a stable and unified state. Architecture was central to Napoleon's cultural program, serving as a tangible representation of power, progress, and national identity. Monumental projects such as the Arc de Triomphe, the Palace of Fontainebleau, and the urban redesign of Paris were not merely aesthetic endeavors, but carefully planned instruments of propaganda. Through these structures, Napoleon communicated messages of military glory, civic pride, and rational order. Streets, bridges, and public spaces were designed to reflect symmetry, functionality, and grandeur, illustrating both the rational principles of Enlightenment thinking and the authority of the state. Public monuments celebrated French victories and commemorated soldiers and citizens, reinforcing collective memory and fostering a sense of shared history. Napoleon also supported museums and the preservation of classical art, establishing institutions such as the Louvre as centers of national pride and cultural education. These initiatives were closely tied to his educational reforms, as schools and academies emphasized classical studies, civic virtues, and technical skills. By integrating architecture, urban planning, and education, Napoleon created a comprehensive cultural vision in which physical space, civic engagement, and historical narrative reinforced one another. The symbolism inherent in these projects conveyed messages of stability, rational governance, and national unity, ensuring that culture was not only admired, but also understood as a reflection of state power and identity. The cultural policies implemented by Napoleon had lasting effects on French society and on the broader European landscape. By linking artistic production, architecture, and education with civic values and national identity, he established a model in which culture served both symbolic and functional roles in governance. French citizens developed a shared sense of pride, discipline, and belonging, anchored in public monuments, museums, and educational curricula that celebrated national achievements. Beyond France, Napoleon's approach influenced other European states, which adopted centralized cultural programs, promoted state-sponsored arts, and used monumental architecture to communicate authority and collective identity. His integration of culture with law, administration, and education demonstrated a holistic approach to state building. Social cohesion, civic loyalty, and national identity were reinforced not only through governance, but also through shared symbols, stories, and artistic expression. Even today, the physical and cultural landmarks commissioned or inspired by Napoleon continue to shape the French national consciousness, highlighting the enduring power of culture as a tool of legitimacy and unity. Through these efforts, Napoleon cemented the understanding that governance and culture are inseparable. Rational administration, codified law, educational reform, and artistic expression together create a society capable of enduring challenges, fostering civic pride, and leaving a lasting imprint on history. Napoleon Bonaparte understood the importance of family and personal networks as instruments of governance and consolidation of authority. Unlike rulers who relied solely on institutional structures or military might, Napoleon strategically deployed family members in key positions to ensure loyalty, stability, and the consistent implementation of reforms across France and its satellite states. His siblings, including Joseph, Lucien, Louis, Jerome, and Pauline, were installed as rulers or administrators in conquered territories such as Spain, Naples, and the Kingdom of Westphalia. This not only expanded Napoleon's influence, but also created a network of governance aligned with his vision of centralized authority, meritocratic principles, and legal uniformity. While critics might view this approach as nepotistic, it was carefully calibrated. Family members were selected for their political reliability, administrative competence, and ability to implement Napoleonic reforms effectively. By combining familial loyalty with meritocratic administration, Napoleon minimized the risk of rebellion or subversion within newly established territories. Furthermore, the presence of his family in leadership positions allowed him to maintain oversight, coordinate policies, and project authority over regions geographically distant from Paris. This strategic use of family exemplified Napoleon's broader approach to governance. Power, loyalty, and institutional reform were mutually reinforcing, and personal networks could be leveraged to stabilize, unify, and modernize complex political landscapes. Napoleon's attention to succession was closely tied to his desire for continuity and the preservation of reforms. As emperor, he sought to establish the Bonaparte dynasty as a stable ruling house capable of maintaining political legitimacy and institutional reforms across generations. This included structuring titles, inheritance laws, and ceremonial practices to solidify dynastic authority while integrating elements of meritocracy. His son, Napoleon II, often referred to as the King of Rome, was positioned symbolically as the heir to the empire, embodying the continuity of both the Bonaparte family and the Napoleonic state. Although Napoleon's military and political ambitions ultimately disrupted the long-term establishment of his dynasty, his careful structuring of succession demonstrates his awareness of the relationship between family, governance, and institutional stability. By intertwining familial continuity with administrative and legal reforms, Napoleon sought to create a self-reinforcing system in which political authority, loyalty, and governance could persist beyond his personal rule. This approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of the interplay between personal, dynastic, and institutional power. Even in failure, the concept of integrating family networks with formal governance influenced later European monarchies and modern political systems, which recognized the utility of personal and familial networks in consolidating authority and ensuring policy consistency. Napoleon's strategic use of family and networks had enduring implications for governance, statecraft, and the relationship between personal authority and institutional power. By placing trusted relatives in positions of authority, he mitigated risks of rebellion and mismanagement in satellite states, while ensuring that reforms, legal, administrative, and educational, were uniformly applied. This approach highlighted the balance between centralized state power and personal loyalty, illustrating how leaders could combine institutional structures with networks of trust to achieve both efficiency and stability. Beyond his immediate reign, the model of leveraging family and trusted networks to consolidate authority influenced subsequent rulers and administrators across Europe and beyond. It demonstrated that governance was not solely an abstract exercise in bureaucracy or law. Personal relationships, loyalty, and strategic placement of trusted individuals could enhance the durability and effectiveness of state policies. In France, the concept of meritocratic appointments combined with loyalty-driven networks created a precedent for professionalized administration that balanced institutional rationality with pragmatic human considerations. Napoleon's familial strategies thus exemplify the interconnectedness of personal authority, institutional reform, and societal stability, reinforcing the notion that governance is most effective when legal, administrative, and human networks are aligned toward shared objectives and coherent state building. When Napoleon Bonaparte rose to power, France was still grappling with the profound upheavals caused by the French Revolution, particularly in the sphere of religion. The revolution had dramatically curtailed the influence of the Catholic Church, nationalizing church lands, dissolving monastic orders, and implementing policies that limited clerical authority. The Civil Constitution of the Clergy, 1790, had attempted to restructure the church under state control, sparking conflict, alienation, and widespread dissent among believers. Many citizens remained deeply attached to religious traditions, while others embraced the revolutionary push for secularism. This fractured religious landscape presented both a challenge and an opportunity for Napoleon. He understood that reconciling religious institutions with the state could serve multiple purposes. It would stabilize society, increase citizen loyalty, and legitimize his authority. At the same time, Napoleon sought to ensure that the church's influence remained subordinated to state priorities. He pursued a pragmatic approach, recognizing that religious faith could not be eliminated but could be integrated into a modern, rationalized governance framework. By balancing reconciliation with control, Napoleon aimed to harness religion as a tool for social cohesion while reinforcing the supremacy of the state over spiritual and temporal matters. This approach reflected his broader philosophy. Political power, legal authority, and social stability were mutually dependent, and religion, if properly regulated, could strengthen the institutions he had spent years building. Napoleon's most significant religious policy achievement was the Concordat of 1801, an agreement with Pope Pius VII that re-established the Catholic Church in France while ensuring state supremacy over ecclesiastical affairs. Under the Concordat, Catholicism was recognized as the religion of the majority of French citizens, allowing public worship and the reopening of churches. Clergy were required to swear allegiance to the state, and bishops were nominated by Napoleon and confirmed by the Pope, guaranteeing state influence over appointments. The Concordat also addressed the contentious issue of church property. While lands confiscated during the Revolution remained under state control, clergy received state salaries, ensuring both financial stability and loyalty. The Concordat was designed to reconcile a deeply divided population, reduce social tension, and integrate the church into the administrative and educational systems Napoleon was constructing. By controlling appointments, funding, and institutional oversight, Napoleon created a model in which the church could operate within the state's framework, contributing to social cohesion without challenging secular authority. The success of the Concordat lay in its balance. It satisfied religious citizens, strengthened Napoleon's legitimacy, and reinforced the principles of centralized administration, demonstrating his ability to integrate ideological and practical governance considerations into a coherent policy framework. The Concordat and Napoleon's broader religious policies had lasting effects on France and beyond. By reconciling the church with the state, he mitigated one of the revolution's most divisive sources of tension, contributing to long-term social stability and institutional legitimacy. The model he created, religion recognized and supported by the state, but subordinated to secular authority, became a reference for later French governments navigating the complex relationship between faith and governance. Furthermore, Napoleon's policies influenced religious-state relations in other European nations, particularly in territories under his control or influence, where similar arrangements were adopted to maintain social cohesion and political stability. Beyond France, the Concordat demonstrated a pragmatic approach to religion and governance. Faith could be harnessed as a unifying force without undermining rational, centralized, and merit-based administrative structures. This strategy illustrated Napoleon's ability to integrate diverse social and ideological factors into a coherent system of governance, reinforcing his broader legacy as a reformer who balanced law, administration, education, and cultural institutions to create a stable, modern state. By strategically managing religion, Napoleon not only addressed immediate social challenges, but also established principles of state-religion relations that continue to influence governance debates in modern societies. Napoleon Bonaparte's military genius extended far beyond battlefield tactics. It also encompassed the comprehensive reorganization and professionalization of the French army. Before his rise, the French military was often characterized by inconsistency, outdated strategies, and insufficient training, particularly following the political and social disruptions of the Revolution. Napoleon recognized that military success, and by extension, political stability, required a disciplined, well-trained, and efficiently managed army. He restructured the army into corps, divisions, and brigades, creating a hierarchy that combined operational flexibility with centralized command. This structure allowed for rapid maneuvering on the battlefield, efficient communication, and strategic deployment of forces, giving Napoleon a decisive edge in campaigns across Europe. Additionally, he introduced standardized training programs, rigorous discipline, and clearly defined roles for officers and enlisted personnel. Meritocratic principles govern promotions and appointments, ensuring that talented officers, regardless of social origin, could rise through the ranks based on performance, skill, and loyalty. This was a marked departure from traditional European armies, which often relied on aristocratic privilege and seniority for advancement. By professionalizing the military, Napoleon created a cohesive and effective force capable of executing complex strategies, sustaining long campaigns, and reinforcing the legitimacy of the state through consistent victories. His emphasis on structure, discipline, and merit demonstrated that military organization was inseparable from governance and institutional reform, reflecting his broader philosophy of rational, centralized authority. Napoleon's innovations extended beyond organizational reform to tactical and operational strategy. He introduced the corps system, which allowed semi-independent units to operate autonomously while remaining capable of rapid concentration for major engagements. This structure enhanced operational flexibility and allowed Napoleon to exploit terrain, maneuver enemy forces, and create decisive advantages on the battlefield. Artillery was given central importance, reflecting Napoleon's early training as an artillery officer, and he developed strategies to concentrate firepower effectively, supporting both offensive and defensive operations. Logistics and supply chains were meticulously planned to maintain the mobility and endurance of troops during extended campaigns, addressing a persistent weakness in European warfare. Napoleon also emphasized intelligence, reconnaissance, and coordination between different branches of the military, creating a multi-dimensional approach to combat that combined speed, surprise, and precision. These innovations were closely linked to his broader state-building vision. A professional army was not only a tool of conquest, but also a stabilizing force, capable of enforcing legal, administrative, and social reforms within France and its territories. By integrating tactical ingenuity, logistical foresight, and disciplined execution, Napoleon transformed the French army into a model of efficiency and effectiveness, influencing military organization and strategy across Europe and inspiring doctrines that persisted for generations. The long-term impact of Napoleon's military reforms extends far beyond his own campaigns. By professionalizing the army, introducing merit-based promotion, and emphasizing training, discipline, and logistics, he set new standards for modern military organization. European armies, observing the effectiveness of Napoleon's forces, adopted similar structures, incorporating corps systems, meritocratic officer selection, and centralized command with operational flexibility. The emphasis on mobility, artillery, and coordinated multi-branch operations became foundational principles for modern warfare. Domestically, the professionalization of the army reinforced the Napoleonic state. It created a loyal, disciplined force capable of both defending the nation and enforcing reforms, ensuring that legal, administrative, and educational initiatives were implemented consistently. Additionally, Napoleon's focus on training and meritocracy contributed to the creation of a professional class of military officers, many of whom later influenced military theory, education, and organization in France and abroad. The integration of organizational, tactical, and logistical innovations illustrates Napoleon's holistic approach to power. Military strength, administrative efficiency, and legal authority were interdependent, each reinforcing the others. Through these reforms, Napoleon not only transformed the French military into a highly effective instrument of conquest, but also established enduring principles that continue to shape military organization and strategy in the modern world. And that wraps up our journey through the life, reign, and legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte. Today, we witnessed not just the story of a military genius, but also the tale of a visionary reformer who reshaped law, governance, and education, leaving an indelible mark on Europe and the modern world. We explored his rise from Corsica, his strategic brilliance on the battlefield, the creation of the Napoleonic Code, the professionalization of armies and bureaucracies, his social and cultural reforms, and the challenges that led to his exile and final defeat. The moral of the story is clear. True leadership is not measured only by victories or power, but by the lasting institutions, laws, and systems that endure long after a ruler's reign. Napoleon's life teaches us that ambition combined with vision, organization, and reform can change the course of history, but also that overreach and miscalculation can bring even the greatest empires to an end. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Napoleon's extraordinary journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with more historical stories here on History Teller YT. Join us next time as we explore more epic events, remarkable leaders, and transformative moments that shaped our world. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep history alive. One of the most significant turning points in Napoleon Bonaparte's reign was the disastrous Russian campaign of 1812, which marked the beginning of his decline. Despite previous military brilliance and years of undefeated campaigns, Napoleon faced a unique and formidable challenge in Russia. The campaign was driven by political and economic motives. Napoleon sought to enforce the continental system, which aimed to weaken Britain through economic isolation, and to punish Tsar Alexander I for failing to comply with French dominance in Europe. He assembled the Grande Armée, a massive force numbering over 600,000 soldiers drawn from France and Allied states, representing one of the largest military assemblies in European history at the time. However, the campaign encountered logistical, strategic, and environmental obstacles that Napoleon had underestimated. Vast distances, poor supply lines, harsh terrain, and the scorched earth tactics employed by Russian forces created extreme strain on the army. Additionally, the onset of the brutal Russian winter compounded these difficulties, decimating troops, animals, and resources. Despite early victories in battles, such as Smolensk, Napoleon's forces were stretched thin, morale suffered, and attrition mounted rapidly. The Russian campaign illustrated that even the most meticulously organized and disciplined army could be vulnerable to strategic miscalculation, environmental factors, and extended supply chains. It also highlighted the limitations of centralized authority when confronting unpredictable external conditions, exposing weaknesses in Napoleon's otherwise highly effective military system. Following the Russian debacle, Napoleon faced renewed resistance from the Sixth Coalition, composed of Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and other allied nations. This coalition, emboldened by Napoleon's weakened position, launched coordinated campaigns across Europe, exploiting the vulnerabilities exposed by the failed Russian invasion. Battles, such as the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, also known as the Battle of Nations, demonstrated the coalition's growing military competence and strategic coordination. Napoleon's forces, though still formidable, were outnumbered and fatigued, suffering from dwindling resources, inadequate reinforcements, and low morale. Internal challenges further compounded these external pressures. Political discontent, economic strain, and growing opposition among some French allies undermined his authority. The coalition wars underscored the limits of Napoleon's expansionist strategy, revealing that sustained military dominance required not only tactical genius, but also stable alliances, reliable logistics, and resilient governance. By this point, Napoleon's previous successes had provoked widespread opposition, creating a continental network of adversaries determined to curtail his influence. Despite his skill in maneuver warfare and strategic leadership, the overwhelming size, coordination, and resolve of the coalition eventually forced Napoleon into a defensive posture, marking a shift from offensive expansion to strategic survival. This phase of conflict illustrated the complex interplay between military strategy, diplomacy, and governance in sustaining a modern empire. While external threats mounted, Napoleon also faced significant internal challenges that weakened the cohesion and stability of his empire. Prolonged wars had strained France's economy, increased taxation, and disrupted daily life, leading to growing dissatisfaction among citizens and elites alike. Some allies and satellite states, previously loyal to the Napoleonic system, began to question his authority and defect to the coalition, further isolating him politically. Administrative and military successes, once sources of legitimacy, became burdens as expectations rose and resources dwindled. Napoleon's centralization of power, which had previously been a strength, now faced the pressures of overextension. Managing far-flung territories, coordinating multiple armies, and maintaining domestic stability strained the administrative system and bureaucratic apparatus. Furthermore, the psychological and symbolic impact of repeated military setbacks eroded the perception of Napoleon as invincible, weakening his ability to command absolute loyalty. These internal challenges, combined with the disastrous Russian campaign and relentless coalition pressure, set the stage for his eventual abdication in 1814. The decline highlighted a fundamental lesson in governance. Even a system as rational, centralized, and well-organized as Napoleon's required careful management of resources, alliances, and popular support to endure over time. His fall underscored the delicate balance between ambition and sustainability, revealing that institutional strength must be coupled with strategic foresight to maintain both power and legacy. After successive defeats in the coalition wars, Napoleon Bonaparte faced an inevitable decline in his power. In April 1814, he was forced to abdicate the throne of France in favor of his son, Napoleon II, though the young heir never effectively ruled. The Treaty of Fontainebleau formalized his exile to the island of Elba, a small Mediterranean territory off the coast of Italy. Although Elba was modest in size and resources, Napoleon was granted sovereignty, a personal guard, and the ability to manage local affairs, reflecting the respect he still commanded despite his downfall. While on the island, Napoleon faced the challenge of reconciling his diminished authority with his enduring ambition. He implemented reforms on Elba, improving infrastructure, administration, and local governance, demonstrating that even in exile, his approach to leadership remained methodical and reform-oriented. Despite the relative stability he achieved on Elba, Napoleon remained acutely aware of his supporters in France and the fragility of the restored Bourbon monarchy. His exile was not a passive retreat, but a strategic pause, during which he prepared for a possible return. The Elban period exemplified Napoleon's ability to govern efficiently in diverse circumstances, maintaining institutional authority even under constraints. It also underscored his persistent engagement with power. Exile did not diminish his vision for reform, governance, or military strategy, but rather became a period of planning and reflection that would enable his next dramatic return to the European stage. In February 1815, Napoleon executed one of the most daring political maneuvers in history, his escape from Elba and return to France, beginning the period known as the 100 Days. Landing on the southern coast of France with a small contingent, Napoleon moved rapidly toward Paris, rallying support from soldiers, officials, and ordinary citizens dissatisfied with the Bourbon monarchy. His charisma, reputation, and record of reform and military success enabled him to regain control with minimal bloodshed. The king, Louis XVIII, fled Paris, and Napoleon re-established himself as emperor. During the 100 Days, Napoleon sought to consolidate power, reform institutions, and mobilize the nation for a renewed confrontation with Europe's coalition forces. He reinstated administrative, legal, and educational policies designed to reinforce loyalty, strengthen governance, and ensure military readiness. The period was marked by intense political activity, as Napoleon attempted to balance domestic stability with the urgent demands of a military resurgence. The 100 Days demonstrated Napoleon's enduring strategic brilliance and ability to inspire loyalty and mobilize resources quickly. However, the challenges were immense. European powers had united decisively against him, and internal political and economic conditions remained fragile. Despite his return, the stage was set for a decisive confrontation that would determine the ultimate fate of his reign and legacy. Although Napoleon's return during the 100 Days was initially met with enthusiasm and support, the practical limitations of his situation quickly became apparent. The European powers, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, mobilized quickly to contain his resurgence, forming the Seventh Coalition. Napoleon's forces, while disciplined and loyal, were numerically inferior and faced the logistical difficulties of rapid mobilization and extended supply lines. Moreover, years of continuous warfare had strained France's economy, weakened domestic institutions, and created social fatigue among the population. Political challenges were also significant. While many officers and soldiers remained loyal, factions within France and former allies were cautious or outright opposed, limiting Napoleon's ability to consolidate power fully. These constraints revealed the fragility of even a highly centralized, efficient, and meritocratic system when confronted with overwhelming external pressure and systemic exhaustion. The 100 Days, though a remarkable demonstration of Napoleon's resilience, strategic genius, and ability to inspire loyalty, ultimately highlighted the structural limitations of his empire. Ambitious expansion, constant military engagement, and centralized authority were difficult to sustain indefinitely. The episode served as both a testament to his enduring influence and a cautionary example of the interplay between personal brilliance, institutional reform, and the broader forces of geopolitics. The decisive confrontation that would determine Napoleon Bonaparte's ultimate fate came in June 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo. Following his return from exile and the 100 Days, Napoleon faced the combined forces of the Seventh Coalition, including Britain under the Duke of Wellington and Prussia under Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. Despite his formidable experience, strategic acumen, and charismatic leadership, Napoleon confronted significant challenges before the battle even began. His army, though loyal and disciplined, had been assembled hastily, with many conscripts lacking the extensive battlefield experience of veterans from previous campaigns. Logistics were strained, supplies were limited, and coordination with allied contingents within France was imperfect. The coalition, having learned from prior encounters, was well prepared, with intelligence networks and coordinated strategies designed to counter Napoleon's typical rapid maneuvering. The battlefield at Waterloo itself presented complications. Marshy terrain, variable weather, and constrained positions reduced the effectiveness of his traditional tactics, including concentrated artillery and rapid flanking movements. Despite these challenges, Napoleon remained confident, relying on his historical ability to exploit weaknesses and execute decisive strikes. The prelude to Waterloo illustrates the complex interplay of planning, terrain, logistics, and morale, and highlights the stark contrast between Napoleon's previous periods of unbroken victory and the strategic difficulties he faced during his final campaign. Even before combat commenced, Waterloo demonstrated that external factors, weather, geography, coalition coordination, could counterbalance even the most formidable military genius, setting the stage for a battle that would reshape European history. The Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, was characterized by intense combat, tactical innovation, and critical errors that ultimately determined the outcome. Napoleon deployed his forces in a series of frontal assaults, combined with attempts to flank the coalition positions and exploit perceived weaknesses. Artillery played a central role, as did the coordination of infantry and cavalry units, reflecting the organizational and operational principles Napoleon had refined over decades. However, key mistakes emerged during the battle. Delays in engaging Prussian forces allowed Blücher's army to approach and reinforce Wellington's troops, creating a situation of numerical superiority for the coalition. Tactical decisions, including the timing of infantry assaults and the use of cavalry, were undermined by exhaustion among troops and the challenging terrain. Despite repeated efforts to break the enemy lines, the French forces were gradually repelled, suffering heavy casualties and declining morale. Napoleon's command, while still decisive and adaptive, was constrained by circumstances beyond his control. Weather-soaked ground impeded artillery effectiveness, coordination with subordinate commanders faltered, and the relentless pressure of Allied reinforcements compounded the challenges. The battle demonstrated both the enduring strengths of Napoleon's military system, discipline, training, and strategic initiative, and its vulnerabilities when confronted with superior numbers, adverse terrain, and well-coordinated opposition. Waterloo became a crucible in which the limits of centralized authority, operational flexibility, and battlefield brilliance were tested against the combined forces of political, logistical, and environmental constraints. The defeat at Waterloo marked the end of Napoleon's reign and the collapse of the Napoleonic Empire. Following the battle, his forces disintegrated, and his authority was irreparably undermined both militarily and politically. Coalition armies occupied France, and domestic support for Napoleon evaporated, leaving him with no viable option but to abdicate once again. The defeat highlighted the cumulative consequences of overextension, continuous warfare, and the inability of even a highly centralized and disciplined system to withstand sustained external pressure. Napoleon's military brilliance, administrative reforms, and personal charisma could not compensate for the overwhelming strategic, logistical, and coalition challenges he faced. In the aftermath, European powers convened to restore a balance of power, reinstate monarchies, and prevent future dominance by any single leader, leading to the Congress of Vienna and a new geopolitical order. Napoleon's legacy, however, persisted beyond his defeat. His legal, administrative, and educational reforms endured, influencing governance across Europe and beyond. Waterloo served as a dramatic illustration of the limits of power and the interplay between military genius, institutional strength, and the broader forces of history. While the Napoleonic Empire ended on the battlefield, the structures, ideas, and reforms Napoleon implemented continued to shape societies long after he was removed from power, cementing his enduring influence in law, administration, and governance. Following his final abdication after Waterloo, Napoleon Bonaparte was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic under the supervision of the British. Unlike Elba, St. Helena was isolated, barren, and strategically distant from European power centers, ensuring that Napoleon could not stage another return. The island presented a challenging environment. Steep terrain, unpredictable weather, and limited resources created both physical and psychological obstacles. Napoleon was accompanied by a small entourage, including loyal officers, aides, and servants, allowing him a degree of comfort and continuity in his daily routines. But the isolation and monotony were stark contrasts to his previous life of conquest, governance, and administration. During his early years on St. Helena, Napoleon spent considerable time reflecting on his career, decisions, and the accomplishments of his empire. He meticulously dictated memoirs, wrote letters, and engaged in discussions with his attendants, analyzing both successes and failures. This period of enforced introspection allowed Napoleon to assess the interplay between military strategy, governance, legal reform, and social policy, providing insights into his understanding of statecraft and the lessons of power. Despite the physical confinement, Napoleon's mind remained active, and his reflections reveal a deep awareness of the mechanisms that underpin authority, the limits of ambition, and the enduring significance of institutional reform. While on St. Helena, Napoleon devoted significant attention to the analysis of his legal and administrative reforms, recognizing them as central to his enduring legacy. He reflected on the creation and implementation of the Napoleonic Code, the centralization of administration, and the establishment of merit-based education and bureaucratic systems. Napoleon considered these reforms not merely as tools of control, but as frameworks for stability, fairness, and societal progress. In his writings, he emphasized that sustainable governance requires a balance between centralized authority and the rule of law, between meritocracy and loyalty, and between military power and civil administration. He also analyzed the factors that contributed to the successes and failures of his empire, including overextension, coalition opposition, and the challenges of maintaining loyalty across diverse territories. These reflections reveal Napoleon's sophisticated understanding of statecraft. He perceived law, administration, and military organization as interconnected instruments, each reinforcing the other to create a resilient and cohesive system. Even in exile, Napoleon's engagement with these ideas underscores his enduring commitment to rational governance, highlighting the intellectual foundation behind his practical achievements. His writings from St. Helena serve as both personal memoir and political treatise, offering unique insight into the mind of a leader who sought to integrate military genius with comprehensive institutional reform. Napoleon's final years on St. Helena allowed him to contemplate the broader philosophical and historical implications of his life and rule. He considered the balance between ambition and limitation, the role of law and administration in shaping society, and the ways in which culture, education, and meritocracy contribute to national cohesion. Despite military defeat and political exile, Napoleon remained deeply aware that his enduring influence would not rest solely on conquest, but on the lasting structures he had implemented across France and Europe.